Good evening, everybody. My name is Monty J. Wolf. I am the artistic and managing director of Brave Soul Collective. First of all, I just want to thank you all for being with us tonight for this kickoff of this three-part event that we're going to be doing. On behalf of Brave Soul Collective and all of our artists, the crew, and everyone else who works with us, we just sincerely appreciate all of you tuning in, RSVPing, spreading the word, and being a part of what it is that we do. As we know, this is all very important work, especially in the age of COVID-19. So we just want to welcome you. And just very briefly, I want to give you a bit of an overview about what you're going to see tonight, what you'll see in October, what you'll see in December, and why we decided to create Black Men Feel. So just very briefly, Black Men Feel is a virtual artistic project that is produced and presented by Brave Soul Collective in partnership with our brothers at the Counter Narrative Project out of Atlanta. This is something that we decided to do because we felt like we needed to bring some attention and some focus to the lives of Black men, particularly Black queer men, but this is about all of us as Black men. And from a larger perspective, it's about all of us as people because we all go through a lot of the same things. We all go through things and are challenged by a lot of the same things. So while a lot of this is about Black men and particularly about the lives of Black queer men, hopefully this is something that everybody will be able to gain something from. But Black Men Feel is something that we decided to put together to be a virtual project that hits you from three different perspectives. So we have some written pieces that some of our contributors have brilliantly offered up of their experiences about being Black men and dealing with their feelings. We also, of course, we will have some theatrical performances and some artistic performances because that is the crux of what Brave Soul Collective is about. And largely, the most important part is going to be the panel discussion, which is what we're going to get into tonight. And we have some brilliant, just beautiful, intelligent brothers who are going to be a part of this, who I'm all honored to share this space with. And I'm going to be talking to them and asking them their feelings about some things in terms of being Black men, dealing with their emotions. But that's largely the focus of this whole thing, is to be able to hit this from three different angles. And I personally just felt it was just very important because as someone who is a Scorpio, has been called emotional all of his life, I've always been in touch with my emotions, and I just feel like that's my bread and butter. But in a lot of experiences, I've found that a lot of people are not connected to their emotions, and that's something I always try to deal with and understand and remember. But a lot of what we're going to be talking about is just really just unpacking a lot of things that we deal with, why we are the way we are, how we deal with things, how we turn the dial, and how we just shift in terms of things that we learn that may not necessarily be helpful, but to just move into another space where where we can communicate, and where we as Black men especially can just be able to say what's on our minds, to be able to acknowledge it without someone telling us to suck it up, without telling us what Black men don't do, without us trying to be pigeonholed or identified as being weak or being vulnerable or being a sissy or being a punk because we show emotion, because all of those things I just feel personally are just really, really problematic. So yeah, a lot of what we're going to be talking about tonight in this first part is going to be from the first segment, which we've decided to call Roots. But as I stated earlier, there are going to be two more components to this whole thing. We will be back in October, at the end of October, with the segment called Wounds, where we're going to be diving into all of the heavy shit. And yeah, we're going to be talking about it and taking it there the same way that we take it there in a lot of our performances. And then we're going to round this out in December. We're going to skip November because there's just a lot of stuff going on in the month of November. But we will be back to round out this three-part series in December, right around the time of World AIDS Day at the beginning of the month. And that's where we're going to talk about healing, which I feel is the most important part, because we're going to talk about the roots tonight. We'll talk about the wounds in October. And then, like I said, when we get into this in December, we want to leave you all with some hope, some alternatives, some suggestions, and just offer up some space in terms of how we stay afloat, how we keep hope, and how we just manage to make this work, especially in this age of COVID-19. Lastly, we want to definitely honor our friends and our brothers at Counter Narrative Project, because without them, this could not have been possible. This first segment is part of the We Will Be Heard National Week of Action, which is something that we are grateful to be a part of. Counter Narrative Project has a whole week of programming with a lot of other partners and affiliates where we'll just be tackling things that are affecting Black gay men. And all of this is in honor of National Gay Men's HIV and AIDS Awareness Day, which is on September 27th. So yeah, that's what we'll be doing. And this is part one of what you're going to see over the next few months. Okay. So as part of hashtag Black Men Feel Act One, which is again Roots, we're going to be tackling about 6 different things that you're going to see with my panelists that are coming up in a minute. And I'm really excited for you to meet them and to speak to them and get their perspectives. But just very quickly, I wanted to run down this list of what we're going to be talking about so you can hopefully see why we threw these things in there. So first, we have upbringing and family, because speaking about roots, that's really what this is about. I just firmly believe that with all of us in terms of people, a lot of who we are as adults and people and the ways in which we function and we operate, it's all connected to family. It all starts with our parents and people who raised us and all of those kinds of things. So we really want to dig into that part. And the brothers have written some great pieces around upbringing and family as well. Secondly, after that, we're going to be segueing into masculinity and femininity, because I think, again, very early on in life, a lot of us learn specific things about what boys do or what girls do, and even just general things like the whole pink versus blue and all that other kind of stuff are things that come up, and then they just tend to rear their ugly heads as we continue to go on in life and, you know, almost kind of imprison us. So we really want to talk about masculinity and femininity within that context. And after that, we're going to segue into talking about gender identity and sexuality, because that is not a straight line for any of us. Gender identity is something that is complicated and varied, and it's not black and white, it's gray. So that's something we'll be talking about, that in terms of identity as well as sexuality and how people identify, how you get to that point, and how you get to the point of being proud of that and speaking about it in a way that does not include shame. After that, we're going to move into talking about societal constructs, because again, I think a lot of the things that we learn as children and when we're young adults have to do with things that have just kind of, this is always the way it's been. And a lot of times, a lot of that shit doesn't serve us. So I feel like, you know, we're going to talk about some of these societal constructs and look at what works, what doesn't work, and how we just break that up. After that, we're going to be moving into talking about silence, because silence is one of the most poisonous things that I think exists, in terms of us not necessarily talking about our feelings, sweeping things under the rug, particularly with a lot of us in Black communities. You know, we don't air our dirty laundry in public, and, you know, all those other kinds of things that sometimes, while I get it in some ways in terms of the reasons that some of those things exist, I feel like a lot of times they do us more harm than good. So we definitely want to talk about silence and how we break the silence. And lastly, we're going to go into talking about breaking cycles, which is really about how we just kind of turn the dial and move from wherever we were to where we feel like we want to be individually and collectively from a larger perspective as a community. So that's what we're going to be talking about. And in a few minutes, I got my panelists coming up to join me so you can meet them, and then we can dive into this conversation and get into the roots. Okay, so we'll be back in a minute.
Now we are workers and fighters, heroes loud without any noise. And we've got work to do so everyone can feel this black boy joy. So take my hand, little brother, take my hand, proud father.
All right, everybody. So we are back. And as you can see, I have my 3 great panelists here with us. So I just want to very briefly introduce each one of them, let them tell you a little bit about themselves, and then we're going to dive into this conversation for Act 1 of Black Men Feel, which is Roots, where we dive into it. So first, I'd like to introduce Mr. Daniel J. Downer, and I will let him take it from here.
Hello, everyone. Assalamu alaikum. My name is Daniel J. Downer. He, him, his. I am with the Pros and Convo Initiative. We are based in Orlando, Florida. We are a Black queer-led organization doing some amazing things to empower and build community among Black, bisexual, queer, and same gender-loving men. And I'm excited to be a part of this conversation with so many amazing, beautiful, handsome beings and spirits because I think it's important, especially during this time, that individuals feel connected, in particular Black men feel connected. Many times we are isolated, not only physically, but emotionally and in our mind. And so I think this is a beautiful representation of connecting with one another, sharing synergy with one another, and hopefully other Black men who get to see this realize that they're not alone.
Thank you. All right. So next we have Mr. Daddy Rod. Take it away.
Hey everybody, I'm Daddy Rod from San Jose, California, where I'm currently being videoed right now, but I currently live in Atlanta. I am a Leatherman. I am a sex worker. I am an overall entrepreneur. I DJ, I do photography, I do baking, I do it all.
Come on,
And just glad to be a part of this panel discussion. Thank you, Monty, for having me a part of this. Also I'm a part of Onyx. I cannot forget about that. Onyx being part of, is a leather organization for men of color who are interested in leather, BDSM, and kink. So I'm out there educating our brothers into exploring their sexuality. And I'm also part of Counter Narrative Program, Counter Narrative Project. And I'm on the advisory board for that. And you can see some videos with, I've done some with David and a few with Charles and Michael. And what I would love for brothers to get out of this is just to, kind of like our brother said before me, Daniel, just we can get connected, because I know with this COVID, I think we've taken for granted just us going to events and just seeing each other and hugging on each other and loving on each other. And with everything being canceled, it's just like, I miss my people. So, so this helps me in a way connect with my people, you know, and hopefully we can still, for those who probably who aren't loving themselves enough, we can provide that love and also that companionship and that brotherhood that we're all seeking and stuff. So I'm happy to be a part of this.
Well, we're glad to have you. Thank you.
Thank you.
Last but definitely not least, we have Dr. David Melbranch. Take it away.
Hey Monty, and hey everybody. I'm honored to be here on this panel and part of this initiative. I remember I was driving from New York to Atlanta when Monty called me and sprung this idea on me, and I just thought it was such a good idea. I'm an internal medicine physician, public health advocate, writer, member of the Counter Narrative Project tribe, so CMP tribe all the way. I've been featured on the Ask the HIV Doc initiative with the Greater Than AIDS collective and the Kaiser Family Foundation. I do a lot of work in sexual health and HIV and STI prevention and treatment. Not affiliated with an official employer right now and right between jobs. So just kind of figuring out next steps in the meantime. I think, you know, one of the most important things for me in being here is, you know, bouncing off what Daniel and Rodney had to say, which is about, I think, you know, especially in these times, but I think even before COVID-19, we were experiencing some levels of disconnection as Black men, just in general. And I do think our mental health, our ability to feel, people recognizing our feelings, our own selves recognizing our feelings, has been kind of downplayed. And particularly when I look at what's going on with Brother Gillum, Andrew Gillum, and his recent, you know, inviting us into his, you know, his sexual orientation and kind of his sexual attraction, I think speaks volumes about where we're at, and also seeing the responsiveness and the different kind of social media responses to his declaration of him being bisexual, both the positive and the negative, has been very curious for me to witness in this day and time. So I think talking about how Black men feel is extremely important in this day and age. So I'm just honored to be a part of this.
All right. Thank you, Dave. Yes, definitely. All of this is extremely important. And again, just very quickly, I want to make sure Rodney and David also mentioned our involvement and affiliation with the Counter Narrative Project, the CMP tribe. Both David and Rodney have been featured on one of the pivotal shows that they do called Revolutionary Health. So we encourage you to go check that out. It's on YouTube. You can just do a search for CNP or Counter Narrative Project and just type in Revolutionary Health. And there is just a wellspring of information and things there about their programming, about things that are specific to us as Black gay men. And again, from a larger perspective, things that everybody it just needs to be informed on, and conversations that need to be had that aren't happening anywhere else. So thank you, CNP, thank you, Charles Stevens, and thank you, Johnny Cornegay, because y'all are amazing, and without y'all, we wouldn't be able to be here, and y'all inspire us. So with that, we're going to keep this rolling, and before we dive into these topics that I mentioned earlier and get into this conversation, I want to allow Brother Daniel to read an untitled piece that he has written. And it seems like this is something that just kind of happened accidentally, because he was supposed to be sending me something else over the weekend. And he's like, oh, I sent the wrong thing. And I was like, well, can I read it? And he was like, sure. So I read it. I'm like, Daniel, stop playing. Like, this is brilliant and it's beautiful. So I asked him if he would read this and open up the panel, because I just think it's important. I love what he said. And all three of these brothers also have written pieces that are going to be on the website that you'll see when you view this. They'll be right at the bottom of the screen with their pictures, and there'll be quotes from their written contributions as well. But this additional piece that Daniel wrote is untitled, and I'm going to let him read that now.
Thank you so much for those kind words, Monty. I am an Aquarian, so I think we have a tendency sometimes to be overly ambitious. And so when Monty gave me the introduction, invitation to write something, I decided to really push myself. I'm not in my mind, I'm not a poet, but I really was able to sit within my feelings and come up with something. So I hope that this resonates with everyone as it resonated with me.
Speak, brother, speak.
All right, so I crave intimacy in many forms. I want soulful conversations and gutted truths. I want my softness to be felt, to be cared for, and for you to know that is an invitation for your softness and not for your recklessness. I want you to know that my softness is an invitation for your positive vibes, your positive energy, and not a path for you to treat my energy like a playground for your enjoyment. My softness can turn into distance without hesitation. Because I believe sometimes you are confused, ride or die, or walk all over me. There is a complete difference between loyalty and stupidity. So please don't blame me like I'm stupid. I crave intimacy in many forms. I want to fill gaps that are not forced, so we both understand the why in isolation. Because love hurts, and it's hard to treat wounds you don't understand. Sex is temporary, drugs only numb, and the only thing is a higher truth. The body is borrowed home, so we have to read her better. This is why I crave intimacy in many forms.
Ashe. Thank you, Daniel.
Beautiful, brother.
So did y'all see why I wanted him to read that?
Beautiful.
Thank you.
Yeah, beautiful.
Yeah, that was beautiful. And it's just very honest, and it's honest in a way that a lot of us as Black men, or particularly even just a lot of us as Black gay men, don't speak about what we need, and the things that we feel like are going to feed our souls as well as our bodies. So thank you for that. I appreciate it. So moving right along, prior to taping, I threw a question out to all three of the brothers that I wanted to ask, because this first part of what we're talking about, I intentionally named these segments. And this first part about roots is very important, because I feel like, before we can try to treat any kind of problem or fix, treating a wound, you got to get to the root of like where it started. And like, it's like peeling back the layers of an onion or a flower. And for me, I just feel like a lot of that is just, it traces back to our parents, the shit that we were taught, a lot of things that we learned, a lot of things that we heard that we should not have heard or seen, and a lot of stuff that was passed down to us that doesn't necessarily serve us as adults, because it shapes and can inform us in ways that may not always serve us in the most positive or affirming ways. So There's a question that I threw out to everybody, and I'm going to let the brothers just kind of dive in and, just answer it off the top of their heads in terms of just thinking back and just trying to pinpoint how old were you, or do you remember when you first consciously became aware of what was acceptable for boys to say or not say or do versus, what was appropriate for girls and all of other kinds of things. So anybody got any insight about that?
I'll start. So for me, I really can't think of an age per se because like I was born and raised in California. So I'm not going to say it's different than well, it is kind of different in some parts of this country, but my parents were very, I guess if the word is open-minded. And I think early on they knew I was gay or some same gender loving, for which word you would like to use. So they never pushed me to say, well, this is what the boy's supposed to do. And this is what only girls do. So I kind of felt free to just kind of be who I was. Because I haven't really told this story a lot. I can't believe I'm going to say this on this, but like when I was like 5 or 6, I was just enamored by Wonder Woman. So I used to have like aluminum foil as my bracelets. And I would have a towel over my head as her hair. And I would get my mom like scars and make the thing, the head thing. And I never got punished for it. Now, in many Black households, you would have been spanked and called faggot or whatever. But my parents did not do anything. They were just like, Rodney? That was it. And whenever we see this photo, because we have photos of everything in our household, and we just laugh. We're just like, that was you. And especially if you had a father in your household and and your father just not really tripping on it at that time, and this is like the early 80s or the late 70s, early 80s, and your father wasn't tripping, I mean, it was just like, okay. I mean, now I'm not saying they didn't. I'm pretty sure in their minds, I'm pretty sure they were thinking like, okay, hopefully you don't be coming out in dresses and lipstick and everything like that. But they just let me be. And the only way I felt like the pressures of being a boy and everything was when I was at school or stuff like that. And for me, even as a child, I was kind of assertive. So even when I kind of felt I knew I like boys more than girls, I would tell the boy, I was like, I think you're cute. And amazingly though, a lot of them didn't really trip. But I remember it vividly because I was around 6 or 7. This was like first or second grade. Because when I did, oh God, I'm really delving deep now. This is when I first did this to a Black boy. He was really cute. Now we're really cool to this day, but when I told him, he also called me ugly at the same time when I told him that. And that stuck with me. And I was like, so it kind of closed me, kind of just shuttered me a little bit, and I will admit to this day, I really find myself attractive because from that point on to like almost college, I was constantly called ugly. So they didn't care about me being gay, but, I just felt that, keep hearing that, when you hear so much, you begin to believe it. So,
Right.
But my gayness was never really an issue. So, and then with my parents, they were like, hey, my mom being a nurse, she was like, just be safe, Rodney. So wear that condom and everything else. So that's my memories of it. So
Okay. And I mean, and for clarification, as you were speaking, I just thought about it. I didn't really clarify when I threw the question at you all. This doesn't even necessarily have to be about what you heard in your household or in your family, because when you started speaking about school, again, like we all didn't just live at home. Like we were around family members. Some people grew up in church, some people, it was school, it was other environments that we all had to be in as children as well. So, I mean, some of those things that you talked about, thank God, like you said, that you had parents who affirmed you at a young age, which is a beautiful thing. But yeah, some of that stuff comes up in school as well. So
yeah.
for David and for Daniel, I mean, it doesn't necessarily have to be about something that happened at home. It could be, but it could be, I'm just really trying to get back to when you were conscious or when you became aware of, you know, this whole thing about what boys didn't do or couldn't do because of all the other things that are kind of placed on us. So whoever wants to chime in.
So I think it's interesting because I have my experience like the opposite of Rod's. Growing up in a household that had a West Indian background or Caribbean background, as well as being a preacher's kid, there was so much toxic masculinity. Like it was like all enveloping. But from a very young age, I was reared by women in my family. So I think of like my biological mother, my grandmother, my grand aunts, and they really kind of like were the nurturers of me for a lot of my younger years and my adolescence. And so I was thankful to be in a space with them because I really was able to become more in tune with like my emotion. But then at the same time, being in spaces with like my biological father and other men, there was a clash from very early on. Like I knew like what was the distinction. Like boys sat like this, girls sat like that. I remember being very young and sitting. I always sat in the front, the first row in the church, and just being really young and not really thinking of like how boys sit and girls sit, and having seen my mom, like she would always sit like with her ankles crossed, and I crossed my ankles, and I remember my dad, my biological father, slapping me real hard on my leg and was like, you know, like chastise me, like that's not how you sit, right? Like you're supposed to like sit like wide leg open. And so I think of like situations like that where very early on, I was told like these are gender roles and like these are the things that come with those gender roles. And then also hugging was something that I saw many of the women in my family do, and it was our way of showing love and affection to one another. Them showing affection to one another, but also to everyone else. And so I remember distinctly going over to my cousin's house. We were have been about like 6 or 7, and going up to my cousin like arms wide open to give him a hug, and him being like we give each other like handshakes or dabs. Like hugging is for punks and faggots. And like instantly, once again, like I remember like okay, like that being something where it's like okay, this is I'm being made aware or conscious about like how I'm expressing my affection, my love is not really how I'm supposed to. And I'm very much soft spoken. And so that was also something growing up that really was kind of looked at as not necessarily being manly or masculine. It's like more like you're supposed to have more bass in your voice, or, you know, there's more supposed to be more depth. And so those are kind of a few of the examples where like I knew from a very early on age, or I was made aware from a very early age about a distinction to gender roles.
Yeah,
Wow.
I think for me, mine kind of was a mix of a little bit of what Rodney was saying, and then also some of what Daniel was saying. So for me, it was, you know, my father was from Haiti, and so I was raised with kind of, but he didn't speak a lot of, you know, he didn't verbalize a lot of these mores or these gender norms that Daniel was talking about. I think for my parents, they weren't so concerned about my sexuality. They were concerned about my grades and how I did. So they didn't give a shit about this, that, and the other. And in fact, it was always that nothing was good enough. So if I got a 99 on a test, it was, why didn't you get 100? If I brought a girl home, they always found something wrong with her. So I was taught very early through them that this was something that really wasn't about, they weren't concerned about that part of my life, or they didn't really care about that part of it. And when they did, it was kind of like I got the message that nothing was going to be good enough, similar to what was going on with my grades. Now, I experienced the exact opposite of what Daniel did with my father. And a recent friend of mine had just told me about this, but in our household, one of the traditions that my dad kind of instituted was, you know, when you wake up in the morning, and I have a sibling, my sister, when you wake up in the morning and you come downstairs or you come and see your parents for the first time, you kiss them on the cheek. Like that was the norm. And before you go to bed, good night, Dad, good night, Mom, you kiss them on the cheek before you go to bed. That was a form of affection. That was a form of tradition that we had that showed that no matter what happened during the day, when you woke up, you were expressing love to your family members. When you went to bed, you were doing the same thing. So one of my friends actually recently mentioned to me, he was like, yeah, I remember coming to your house and seeing you kiss your dad goodnight. And I was like, what the hell? Like, he was really confused about that because he had never seen a household where a son actually kissed a father goodnight. So I think it was interesting because my dad did have the traditional old school Haitian, you know, Caribbean kind of mentality where they didn't accept homosexuality, but they hadn't been really concerned about that up to that point. And I think for me in school, you know, I was exploring things. I was attracted to a gym teacher that I had. I was attracted to some other classmates. And then the term gay, the phrase gay got thrown around a lot at school, but it didn't. Gay back then for us meant corny. We weren't really saying stuff like, you're gay, that's so gay. It didn't mean you suck dick or you sleep with other guys or you're attracted to other guys. It wasn't that. It was like, man, that's so gay. And it meant it was corny. Like, and it's a weird thing to explain to people because people say, well, it does mean it's a slur against homosexuality. And I have to explain to people, like, it really wasn't back then. So when we said that, people weren't like, oh my God, they spooked me. I do like other guys and I feel so traumatized and triggered about this. It was more like, no, that's just the word that we use to call somebody corny. Because I remember calling people gay and not even thinking to myself who they slept with or who they were attracted to. I just thought they were corny. And you know, the rest of the world is talking about gay, about who you're attracted to. And I'm talking about this. But you know, for me, I got those kind of norms from home. I got that kind of stuff at school. And it wasn't so much a big deal about the sexual orientation. And I was just going on my journey by myself. I actually told a friend of mine yesterday, he was laughing at me. I don't know how we got in this conversation, but we were talking about like how we first knew we were attracted to men. And for me, like my first sexual experience was masturbation. It was actually masturbating to a Billy Ocean performance on Saturday Night Live. And so what's funny about that is that, you know, Billy Ocean, you know, suddenly Billy Ocean, get out of my dreams, get into my car, Billy Ocean, Caribbean Queen. Like, I was really attracted to that brother and I didn't understand it, but I knew that it turned me on. And that was the first time I like experienced an orgasm, was watching Billy Ocean. And so, you know, when I say that to people, they laugh. It's the same response I'm getting from Monty right now, but that's just the way it was. So for me, it wasn't so much a trauma thing. And I probably didn't give a more feminine performance. I did like sports. I did play sports. So I never got picked on for my mannerisms or for people suspecting that I was attracted to other guys. And I didn't even understand how attracted I was to other guys until college. So those kind of formative years didn't really dive into me that much. It was kind of more of, you know, some of the subtle stuff with what my father said, and then this kind of negative connotation to gay, but not always around, you know, sexual attraction.
Okay. Well, thank you.
I'm gagging on that Billy Ocean. I'm sorry.
No, and again, y'all know. I mean, I wasn't laughing at you.
I thought this was a safe space. I'm feeling triggered and judged right now.
No judgment. No judgment. I mean, and you know, again, I'm putting myself out there. You know, back in the day, in teenage years, it was International Male Catalog.
Right.
Shamar Moore back in the day, before he became who he was, when he was in them International Male
catalogs.
Them bikinis. Listen, Yeah, I was
Yeah,
very
Shamar used to
clear.
be Shamar used to be serving it back in the day.
Oh yeah.
So I mean, no, but that's all. You know, this is a safe space, and you're all, you know, affirmed, and I appreciate you all sharing your stories, because that's the other part of this that I want people to see when they watch this, is that, you know, again, Janelle Monáe says this about Black people all the time, and it's the same thing about us as Black gay people, about people, period. But we are not all monolithic. And the problem with a lot of us, particularly, you know, a lot of people who are not Black try to do it to us as Black people, and we fight against it vehemently. And, you know, I think a lot of us as Black queer people, you know, we rail against it, but to me, not enough, because I think we need to push back and like let people know, regardless of whatever your perception may be about who we are, who we love, who we're attracted to, who we feel, you know, safe with emotionally, sexually, otherwise. Those are things that people get to make up on their own. And again, it's not a straight line. You know what I'm saying? It's never a straight line. It's just like life that way. None of this shit is a straight line. It zigs and it zags. So that was why I just threw that question out there, is because I wanted to get everybody's feedback. And for me, I have a similar experience to Rodney with like, I mean, my parents were divorced, so it was kind of like I spent time with my mother, who I lived with, and then the times when I would spend with my father. What I always remember about my experiences with my father was that he taught me to never be afraid of showing emotion. Like you said, David, like, you know, it was, you know, he would give me a hug. You know what I'm saying? He told me he loved me and all those other kinds of things. And for me as a kid, like, I was not taught, okay, well, you're not supposed to do this or whatever, because my prototype for a man was like, no, look people in the eye. Don't be afraid to admit when you make a mistake. Say, I'm sorry. Ask a question if you don't know something. And, you know, he was not afraid of showing me affection, and that didn't make me gay. You know, it didn't turn me into a sissy or a punk. If anything, I feel like it made me a more whole person, to allow me to be able to be in touch with my feelings in a way that a lot of us are not. So I think that, you know, all of those things are important to point out. But let's just keep this moving along, because, again, I think a lot of this is an ongoing conversation, and I do want to point that out, because we're going to be talking about things tonight. We'll be back in October. We'll be back in December. But one of the things that I really want to make sure people understand is that we encourage you to have these conversations, to continue this among your friends, people in your networks. And this is just a larger conversation that needs to happen around us as Black men. Yes, those of us who identify as being Black and queer, but just from a larger perspective, us as Black men, in terms of being able to talk about our feelings, because it's just something that, you know, we just get pigeonholed a lot of times, and it doesn't serve us. So moving along, one of the other things that I added to the list of themes for this particular part around talking about the roots was just this whole thing around masculinity and femininity, and what we remember, or, you know, like when those things, you know, like how you feel about that in terms of, you know, like, and some of it we've already kind of touched on in terms of talking about high school and, you know, like middle school, and those things that we learned and that we carried, and, you know, all of that. So is there anything anybody wants to throw in around masculinity and femininity very quickly?
I was curious about Daniel, like with his father and his uncles and stuff, and the men in his family, like the Caribbean definition of masculinity. Because for my dad, it was very much about, I think his definition of masculinity was around hard work. It wasn't so much about the performance of what you did and kind of those the stereotypical gender role norms, like you had to be really buff or be this and that. Because my father used to sit not with his legs wide open. He used to sit with his legs crossed. Like he would have one leg crossed over the other and be playing a Nintendo Game Boy and be just as masculine as anybody else. And so he didn't give a shit about any of that. And I think there was a certain amount of, the message that I got from that is there a certain amount of defining masculinity as, I don't give a fuck what you think about what I do or my mannerisms or whether something is perceived to be feminine or not. My dad was just himself. So I don't think he really thought about that. And that message came across loud and clear to me. So I'd be interested in what Daniel was getting, because he was talking about some of that before that.
Yeah, I definitely wasn't getting that. Like, there are like definitely hardworking. I think that's something that's very prominent within many Caribbean and West Indian households. But also there was this whole machismo, right? And so like for many of the men in my family, masculinity was also connected to like offspring and children. So many of them had a lot of a lot of a lot of children on the record and off and many off the record. Actually,
Yeah.
my my biological grandfather on my dad's side was known to have, if I'm not mistaken, he had a wife in Jamaica, he had a wife in Canada, he had a wife in the UK, and had many children. Actually, very interestingly enough, Downer is, I feel like, is a pretty common name, but it's so funny because like every once in a while, my siblings and I will be like, "Oh, by the way, you have another cousin that we found." Yeah, right. And so masculinity is also tied to like being able to produce children. And then also like on a more personal level, one of my uncles that I know of um, identifies as like openly gay, but the way that that situation occurred was like through sexual assault at the hands of like two white men in Jamaica. And so I think with my family there was also some like hatred for what anything connected to like homosexuality um, or same gender attraction or behaviors. And so growing up, it was always very interesting because I would always hear like whispers of like talking about my Uncle Albert, but never like ever being able to meet him or hear anything other than like his name. And the only way that I found out this information is I remember like I was little and we had like Sunday breakfast and I was in the next room and I was supposed to be asleep, but I was keeping my ears open. My aunt was like, Daniel reminds me of Albert.
Mm.
And reminds me of Albert. He's so carefree and just really just kind of like very just like warm energy to be around. And then my dad was like so offended, so upset. He was like, he doesn't want a son to be a Batiman and you know, all of these things. And so yeah, like very early on in my childhood, like the men in my household were very, very determined to really kind of like harness whatever femininity I had or whatever softness I had and really like transform that. So like I was pushed heavily into sports, did not care for it, was heavily pushed into a lot of different things, even to the point of conversion therapy. And um, yeah, they just anything that was like soft, they did not necessarily care for, and they saw that as a form of weakness. And I think in some ways it kind of triggered them about what had occurred to their brother and the sexual assault that he had, and kind of blaming the sodomy of their brother as to what caused him to become who he is.
Yeah, there's also a kind of racialized component to that about same-sex attraction cannot be black or it's un-African for, you know, men to be attracted to other men or women to be attracted to other men, or variations or fluidity in gender identity to be some kind of Eurocentric notion. And that's been rebuffed and reviewed so many times. And actually that belief is so religiously entrenched in like traditional European Christian values and colonialism. It's really interesting to hear us kind of perpetuate that. But it was interesting that, you know, that you said like, oh, well, you know, yeah, he was sodomized by two white men. And I was thinking to myself, oh God, there's that racial component to it. Like, yeah, these white guys brought this to it because brothers really aren't like that on their own. And so it has to be something white or Eurocentric that gets injected into them literally and figuratively that makes them that way.
And there's a lot of us who believe that bullshit. And that's why I'm glad you pointed that out, because that is not the truth. That is, in fact, bullshit. Black queer people have existed since the beginning of fucking time. So, you know.
But you have to really bring that back to the failure of our community of educating ourselves of our African ancestry, where we know in tribes, I guess the tribal men, I forgot what they call them, they will like almost have harem of boys and stuff like that. You know, very homosexual type stuff going on, and it was the norm.
Yeah, the gatekeepers, if you read some of Malidoma Some's literature about gatekeepers in Burkina Faso and just being on a spiritual plane. Yeah, and same gender attraction is like a more spiritual high plane than, you know, other people. But, you know, everyone will say, well, homosexuality is un-African. And I'm like, well, is the Bible more African than same gender attraction? Like, I don't understand. I'm confused here. So tell me who wrote the Bible and why you're quoting that to support that, you know, same-sex attraction is, you know, un-African. It's just a strange, twisted logic that I see.
Well, and it's community in the church, that is literally a whole nother conversation.
That's a whole other session.
And you'll, thank you, Rodney. And you'll note, like I didn't add that in because I feel like that might be like, you know, depending on how well this is received, that might be like the next time we do something like this to really kind of like chew on this, to talk about it from a performance perspective and to sit down and have a conversation, because the Black church is such a huge integral part of Black culture. And, you know, it's such a huge part of our story for so many of us, but it's done so much harm in a lot of ways to a lot of us in terms of our psyches. And that's not even just for Black people who identify as being queer. There have been other people who've just been traumatized by things. And again, I'm not downing the Black church or religion or whatever, however you practice or what you believe. But when those things begin to serve as barriers and kind of put you in, you know, to begin to imprison you, like you got to start questioning, like, okay, is this beneficial to me or not? But just to kind of bring it back to something that Daniel said really quickly before we move on. I love that you brought up the whole thing about you said your mother and your aunts talking about kind of drawing that parallel between you and this uncle. You said his name was Albert. You know, because this is another part of why I wanted to, like I said, this is about us as Black men, but I've said it in some of the PR and I'm going to continue to say it. What we're talking about is just as much about Black women as it is about Black men, because we all got mamas, we all got grandmas, we all got aunts, teachers, and people in our lives. And again, a lot of the tape, a lot of the shit that we were taught, a lot of stuff, like you said, situations like that where you're in the other room and technically it wasn't something that you should have heard, but, you know, we absorbed a whole lot of stuff. You know, just those terms like, you know, well, you know, he got a little sugar in his tank. Or, you know, is he light in the loafers? Or is he sweet? You know, all of those kinds of things. And that wasn't shit that I heard from men in my family, because it wasn't a whole lot of men that were in my immediate family. You know, I lived with my mother and then maybe some of my uncles here and there that I saw. But these were conversations, not so much with my mother, but I heard other Black women in my family say around other folks. And again, I'm an observant, like sharp as a tack kid. And I'm like, what does that mean? You know, and it was, you know, stay out of grown folks' business or go play or whatever. But, you know, this is just as much about our mothers and the Black women in our families or whatever, because, yeah, sometimes they say mamas always know. Sometimes, you know, it's the grandmother or, you know, the people who, you know, who are those people that they knew who their children were and they still decided that, okay, this is my baby and I love them and I'm going to support them and affirm them.
Daniel, is he still alive? Is your Uncle Albert still alive?
Yes, he's still alive and he's in the UK. We've been able to connect since, and it's been beautiful to be able to kind of like talk with him and really learn so much wisdom. And it's funny, Monty, that you talked about grandmothers, because my upbringing is really unique in the sense that I was with my biological parents for probably like the first, I would say, 10 years of my life. And then custody was given to my grandmother, my mother's mother, after conversion therapy. And really, my grandmother was the one who helped me embrace my queerness, because she was really early on, and she really wanted to make sure in her mind that I knew that I was loved and that I was valued. I always find it interesting, God rest her soul, that we would like, our bonding was like gardening and cooking, because we lived on a farm. And I would remember us shelling peas and her talking about finding a mate, but she would say he or him. And I would be like, that's weird, but she knew, right? And so like when you said that, it automatically made me think of, you know, how she really tried to affirm me and make me feel loved and valued, for who I was, who I didn't know that I was at that moment and at that
That's a
time.
blessing right there. Because
Yeah.
that happened with me too. Because my grandmothers on my father's and mother's side, they knew early, but they never talked down on me. Actually, I'll never forget my recent grandmother on my mother's side who passed last year. Like in her last years, even with her dementia and stuff, she was like, "Where's your husband?"
Hmm.
I was like, I said, "I don't know yet." But she was just so cool, you know, and
The elders don't care. They don't have
they
time for
really
they don't have
honestly,
time for that BS anymore. They've lived too long. They're like, we're
yeah,
just gonna
she
cut to
was
the chase, babe. We don't
92.
need
She's 92. She was just her thing was, I'm just blessed to get up, see daylight, you know what I'm saying? And at
Right.
that time, and David knows, I was pretty much being a caregiver along with my mother and my auntie. So we were just doing the basic stuff. So me being gay was just not even on her radar. And so it was just having that affirming love from not only your grandparents, but your parents. And piggybacking off what David said earlier about the affection from your father, like, I'll never forget when my father used to do these group tours. We bring like kids from the Bay Area to the black schools. Because a lot of these kids never been on a plane before, never left California. So he would bring them to the historical black colleges. And I would get my father at the airport and I'd give him a hug and a kiss. And some of the guys was like, I'm like, yes, this is how I greet my father. But I realized though, some of these men don't even know who their fathers are, or if they knew their fathers, like kind of like with Daniel's perspective, very kind of like standoffish and just like this is the way you don't show affection like this. So for some of them, they were kind of like, oh my gosh. I was like, well, this is the norm for us. So like even when I'm here with my dad right now, visiting California, before we go to bed, I give him a hug and a kiss.
Right. And thank you for sharing that. And that really just makes me think about what we're getting ready to move into, which is talking about societal constructs, because I really feel like it sounds like, fortunately for a lot of us, you know, Daniel, you know, while you said that you had some challenging experiences with, you know, some of the family members, and some of that stuff was kind of implanted in you, you know, the beauty is me hearing you speak about the uncle, and speaking about your grandmother, because my hope and my prayer for a lot of us as Black gay men is that, you know, yeah, we may not have been affirmed across the board, because I can't think of anybody who just said, oh, everybody just completely affirmed me and, you know, rah, rah, sis, boom, bop, like it just doesn't work like that because it's not a straight line. But that we all had at least somebody at some point along the way that saw us or that knew us, or wherever that was, whether it was at childhood, you know, adolescence, being a teenager or a young adult, someone in our family that just loved us and made it clear that, listen, there's nothing wrong with you. And that's a huge piece. And like I said, Rodney, for you to point out that when you gave your father a hug and a kiss in front of other people, that there was this, you know, noticeable reaction from other people.
Absolutely.
That's something. Because think about what the norm is. You know what I'm saying? Because obviously what you did was not the norm, because it elicited some kind of response from people.
Yeah, for them. Yes, for them it was.
Right. And it's just it's those kind of things that I think, you know, we just, you know, I think that stuff exists, but, you know, we just had to find our way through it, you know, the best way we know how. And that's why, you know, my hope is that, you know, I think, you know, yeah, as somebody who's in his 40s, I think, you know, a lot of these babies that are coming up now and they're younger, they have a, you know, like, I'm just grateful to see them like embracing these things at a much younger age. And then also having parents, you know what I'm saying, that affirm them and that are public about it, you know.
We have to be careful about using the term norm, because I think what we've been brainwashed to believe is the norm, particularly for Black men. We've also been brainwashed to believe that Black men don't take care of their children as well. And there have been subsequent studies. I mean, it's always been like, oh, well, absentee Black fathers And then when you see a more nuanced study, there was one that came out from the CDC like probably about 5 or 6 years ago that actually talked about time spent, and they really broke down, is the person physically in the house, or do they spend time with their children? Do they take them to school? Do they take them on outings and like quality time? And they saw that actually Black men spent as much time, if not more time, with their children, even if they were separated or not married, to the mother, than their white and Latin and Asian Pacific Islander counterparts. So I think also like when we're talking about norms about paternal affection and how families, in particular Black men, respond to children who are same gender attracted, we have to be careful about using the word norm, because what the norm, you can see even with the four of us, there's differences in what was our normal. And I don't think there's one normal. So I would never say that for Black men it's a normal that Black fathers, you know, are sexually prejudiced and hate their sons or daughters who are same gender attracted. Because I've heard so many stories. I almost think it just hasn't been put out by the media, or the studies haven't been done to demonstrate the wide diversity, because it you know, you have to get into this anti-Black narrative in the media that we're more homophobic or sexual prejudice than other races and ethnicities. And that's not the case at all. We know that for a fact.
Thank you, David. I know I totally agree, and I appreciate you pointing that out, because I think that does also begin to just kind of like we have to kind of rewrite that story in terms, or just correct those things when they're thrown out, because again, a lot of other people outside of the Black community, yeah, they do get real comfortable trying to tell us about us, and it's just like, yeah, it's like, but you don't know what the fuck you're talking about, and you know, and even within us, you know, I think, you know, it's on us to, you know, to push back on some of those things, and to, you know, to challenge people to just not think so damn flat, because so much of what, you know, what has become the standard, or certain things that have been fed almost to the point where it becomes like a monster, to the point where we have toxic masculinity and all these other kinds of things that are just overblown, where it's just kind of like you said, oh, if I sit a certain way, that's gay, or if I, you know, if I wear pink, that's gay. And it's just kind of like, y'all, is this really what we doing? Like, you can't wear a pink shirt, right, and, you know, and coordinate, you know, without somebody, you know, trying to point you out as being gay. That is flat and linear as fuck. And I'm just kind of like, good for you. But
and a lot of that shit comes from white people too. That's what's funny about it. It didn't start with Black people.
Yeah. So I mean, I think that, you know, again, when we're looking at all of this, the societal constructs are a part of it. What I want to kind of move into as we begin to wrap up the last two most important parts of this conversation is the first one being silence, because I think that, you know, there is a lot to be said about just, you know, what happens, and you know, like I said, this whole, you know, we don't air our dirty laundry in public. You know, kind of, I've always heard that, you know, and I'm sure there are other people outside of Black people who say that, but again, I grew up in a Black family, so that's what I know is my point of reference. And just the whole thing in terms of silence, or like Daniel, like you talk about, like the uncle, and, you know, there's certain family members that, you know, certain people want to sweep under the rug or not talk about them or what have you. And I just wonder if any of you have anything to say around what that, you know, what the effects of that, you know, have been in your own lives, or just witnessing and seeing that play out.
I think for me, silence was very early on. It was very, very damaging, because I was bottling in so many and absorbing so many emotions and feelings, and like keeping them bottled up, and really kind of exhibiting from a very early age a lot of anxiety and a lot of depression, because I was having to really just kind of like not share. Not allowed to share, you know, the way I was feeling. And that was outside of my sexuality. Being a preacher's kid, I think other preacher's kids can resonate with me on this. As soon as you come out the womb, you are media trained. Like, literally, you could have had an argument at home, dishes could have been flying, could have been thrown, and by the time we make it to the front row of the church, like, no bruises, all covered, everyone's smiling, and like, we're pushing forward. And so for a long time, I was made to feel guilty about being vocal, because being vocal, at least in my household, was seen as, I will never forget, when everything was going on with my conversion therapy. What I was told was that if I spoke about it, it would break up the family. And my two younger sisters would then have to go to foster care, and you know what they do with children in foster care. And so the first two therapists that I had to see in school, I didn't say anything because I was just like, if I say something, like my family broken up. And so silence really damaged me a lot, because then years later I had to rework through all of those feelings and all of those emotions, and all of that, like all of that trauma. And thankfully I'm in a better space now to where, like, I'm realizing how to vocalize those feelings, how to vocalize that pain, how to vocalize that trauma, and my siblings as well, because even though all of them don't identify as queer or same gender loving, they experience pain as well, in their silence. And so we've had to go on this journey together, and really lean on one another, on how to be vocal, about our pain, and really how can we heal and be whole and be resilient. So for me, silence really was really damaging, and I think if I was able to realize a little bit earlier how I felt, then maybe some of the pathways that I went on, I would have possibly avoided. I don't know. I don't really believe in mistakes happening. That's just not a philosophy that I live by. But maybe, there might have been some change to the journey.
Well, thank you, Daniel, for sharing that. And thank God, as you were talking, I'm just sitting here and I'm thinking, it's a testament to, when we commit ourselves to wanting to, as I always say, clean our shit up and like reverse some of what we've been taught. That's not an easy process. It's ugly. It's uncomfortable. It is never ending. And it's rigorous. So to hear, you talk about that kind of trauma and the things that you experienced, which no child should ever experience those kinds of things. But to hear that, you were able to move through those things and, do the work that you're doing now to be able to create that space for other people, that's a gift and that's a blessing. So thank you for sharing that. Anybody else have anything they wanted to share about that really quickly?
Regarding silence, I can't really say. I guess I was raised in a household where my parents would say, "Speak what's on your mind." So my mom would always say, "I don't want to be guessing nothing." So she would just be open with whatever. So if there was any kind of silence, it wasn't about the gayness. It was about other stuff, whether it be other insecurities.
And that was going to be the other thing that I wanted to say, because I think that when we're talking about this, particularly for us as Black gay men, it definitely shapes, and it can shape and it can inform and it can color our experiences in terms of, how we express ourselves if we've been taught to not, to kind of like bottle something up. But across the board, if we're talking about sexual abuse, if we're talking about drug abuse, I mean, across the board, this whole thing about silence is way more, expansive.
Well, absolutely, because everyone had various traumas. So, and unfortunately, due to social media, some people put all their business out there, while others are like, not at all.
Yeah.
And because for those who decide to put it out there, unfortunately, you have people out there who make a mockery of it.
Yeah, and that's a slippery
instead
slope.
of being a healing energy, they're being a negative energy. Because I feel like if you're that bold to put your traumas out there to the world, that's a sign for help. Someone they're seeking some kind of help. I wouldn't say you should do it that way, but it honestly is. And so I with my parents, they said speak to us, but they said let's still keep it within the family, because like my mama said, everybody don't need to know all your business. And that's the kind of honest truth. But
Right.
we kept things within the household, and like if we had any issues or whatever, we talk once amongst ourselves. And so being that I realized how blessed I can't stress enough how I feel so blessed to have had parents who were so affirming and just were just wanted the best out of me. Didn't really care about my gayness or anything. So like, and David knows this because he knows we've known each other a long time. And when I see brothers who are like struggling, I really come to them in love because I realize they are lacking or they didn't experience what I experienced.
It puts
So
a lot of
I try
stuff
to be
into
there for
perspective.
them. Not saying I'm trying to replace their parents or anything, but there's a brother out there who cares about you. I ain't trying to sleep with you. I ain't trying to do all this. It is obvious you have missed something, and I'm just trying to, at least if not from me, from someone else, just be there for you, brother. So you can just, if you need someone to just yell your problems to, I'm here. If you need a hug, I'm here. Just stuff like that, So
Yeah.
I think for me, silence kind of hits on other levels too. So a lot of times when we speak about silence, it's whether we use the archaic construct of coming out, whatever that means for people, which I hate it as a phrase and as a social construct, coming out. I like Darnell Moore's conception of inviting somebody in. And I think that centers more of the power and the locus of control within us, so that we are in control of who we let in our space, rather than a paradigm of we're trapped somewhere and we can't get out and we have to bust out and there's some kind of magical disclosure that happens where you announce to the world that you're gay. I think where silence comes in on top of that, and I'll give myself as an example. My parents knew about me being same gender loving when I was like 22, 23 in medical school. I let my mother in. I think it was first year medical school, and then a year later it was my dad. The thing about silence is tricky though, is that it manifests in different ways. So for instance, when you get home to visit your family for holidays, or when there are family gatherings, reunions, stuff like that, and your straight siblings can talk about who they're dating, and they are asked vigorously who they are dating, and there's a profound interest expressed in who they're dating and what their love lives are. And then when it comes to us, there's silence. So silence can work both ways in that we are not recognized. Our form of love, our form of relationships, our form of intimacy and partnerships and dating is not even acknowledged by them. So there's not only a silence on our end, but there's a deafening silence on our family's end, because they are not interested, are not accepting. And though on the surface, like someone would say to me, oh, David, your parents, they must have met your exes in the past, and they must have come by to visit for Thanksgivings and Christmases and stuff like that. And I was like, nope, because I knew better. And then if you ask me when I came home to visit my parents, do you think my parents asked me about who I was dating? And my mother was so uncomfortable. I remember one time she tried to ask me about if I was dating somebody, and she kept tripping and stuttering and stumbling. And I could tell it made her so uncomfortable. I said, Mom, I know you don't approve of this, and I know you're praying that it goes away every day, which she was. And I said, I would rather you not ask me anymore than to sit there and make it be such an awkward conversation for us, so that I feel ashamed about who I am because your reaction is that way. And a lot of the silence is about, or a lot of the communication, if we stretch it outside of silence, is kind of what we give other people. So if someone asks, like if I'm dating Daniel or Rodney and I'm in with a bunch of straight folks in my family, and they say, oh, look at Daniel, look at Rodney, how did y'all meet? And I start going, well, we kind of met you, and then I stutter, and then I'm confused, and I seem uncomfortable. Those straight people are going to hone in on that immediately and jump on it. Now, if I say something like, yeah, Rodney, that's my boyfriend. We about to go to Aspen next week. We about to go skiing. How's your girl that you were dating last week? And could you pass the macaroni and cheese, please? If you do it like that and let them know, because it has to come in from within that you're that comfortable, that it's not only not silence, but it's your norm. and it's no big deal, they have nothing to work with. Zero to work with. If you give them the power to let them know that you're uncomfortable with yourself and you need to be silent, or you're gonna censor your stuff, or kind of dilute your stuff down for them, for their consumption, then they're gonna go with that. So there's so many levels to what this silence, and at least from my perspective, what I've experienced in life, it's much more than just a disclosure or a coming out and declaring to the world that you're same gender loving. It's much more nuanced than that. And certain periods, certain workspaces, certain parts of the city where you could be much more vocal, and then there are other parts where you can't. And it's a decisional balance that you have to take. Do I want this job? Do I want to get killed and attacked because I'm not silent? So there's so many levels. Like, you could literally have a series talking about silence and same gender attraction. They could go over months and perhaps years to talk about some of the diversity in the stories that we have.
No, you're right, and I think, you know, I love the parallel that you drew about the whole thing about being around family and, you know, setting those things up or asking those questions, because like you said, it's about when we take ownership of something, like, you know, when you tell the truth, you know, and again, getting to that point is not always, it's not a straight line. It's not just snap your fingers and get there, especially not if you've had all of this shit that we just talked about that's been very meticulously and carefully placed on you to the point where you feel like, okay, there's something wrong with me. I don't matter. I'm not good enough. And again, some of that, again, all of this stuff is not just in a pretty box. It's just about sexuality and gender. It's the things that you talked about, David, in terms of, you know, the expectations about grades, about school, and about doing this, the expectations about playing sports and doing these things, or about, you know, all kinds of stuff.
But what if Daniel, if you had met your Uncle Albert at a young age, like, have you ever thought about how that would have impacted you, or if you got to hear his story, or he got to talk to you about what was going on? Like, do you think that would have impacted you in some kind of significant way? Because that's curious to me.
Yeah, I definitely do, because like I feel like I've always loved to learn like the wisdom of my ancestors, and I really feel like if Uncle Albert and myself were able to connect earlier, that they're like, my journey as a Black queer man definitely would have been different, because we would have been able to have those conversations. You know, my grandmother was affirming in her own way, but there was a limitation to like how we could have a conversation. Like, I couldn't have a conversation with my grandmother about like masturbation and fantasy and, you know, feelings of attraction. So I definitely think we have connected earlier, that it would have been different.
Yeah, and those are things that, you know, it's sad that, you know, things have to play out the way that they do. But like you said something earlier, Dan, you know, I don't believe anything happens by mistake. Right. And, you know, even all of those, the trips and the falls and the ways that we stumble over ourselves to get to the point where we feel like, okay, you know what, this is who I am, and I'm not turning around or making any apologies about that. That journey to getting to that place is very different from all of us. And the way that looks now for me at 45, it looked different 20 years ago in terms of coming out to my mother, coming out to my father, then coming out to telling both of them that I was HIV positive, you know, some years later, and just all of those kinds of things that just lay on. And by the time you get to a certain point, for me, it was just like, okay, you know, it was my parents who instilled in me individually and even together when they would speak to me. It's kind of like, you have nothing to be ashamed of. Like, you know, love yourself. You know, like, they affirmed me in those ways, but there were all these other things, you know, like I only had one male cousin, you know, around the time when we were kids, you know, that I would play with or whatever, but all my other cousins were girls. And like, to this day, like, me and all of my other cousins, you know, I'm tightest with the girls in my family. So, you know, that was where some of that stuff I started to learn all of that, because it was kind of like, oh, well, you know, they jump and rope. You know, you go find a ball and you go play with that. And I'm looking at them like, nigga, what? Like, what are you talking about? Like, I don't, you know, I was, again, a soul child. If anything, I was going to be in the room listening to music and albums or whatever, but putting a football in front, sir, what? It just, you know, it just never worked. But again, getting to that point where you feel like, okay, you know what? This is who I am. It's never a straight line to get there. But I think that all of these things definitely play a part. But we
And I
want to
know,
go ahead. Go ahead.
I know this is a little off topic, but I know Monty, you and I share a love for music. And it's actually interesting because music was the only place that I was allowed to tap into my femininity. And so like I ran wild with that. Like I was allowed to play the piano. I was allowed I grew up we didn't really weren't allowed to listen to R&B music, but country music was a big thing. So I was allowed to play the guitar. I was allowed to play the flute. I tried to play the harp. I just didn't have the discipline for it. But music really was like, it was like my sanctuary. And songwriting became something for me that allowed me to really be able to express those feelings. And so I remember very early on writing specifically like gospel pieces for choirs and choral groups, and being able really to like take my pain and my experience that I felt and put it in a song, and to actually like hear it and in a way like have like that little smirk inside, like, "Oh, I can finally like release this." So I loved how you brought up music, because I think for some of us music has been a sanctuary,
No, absolutely.
or for whatever reason it's one of the places where we are immune and allowed to really tap into that femininity.
Yeah, absolutely. And I know Rodney's a big, he was raised on a lot of soul music as well. And I think, like, as you're speaking, I'm thinking about something. There's all this stuff going on around Twitter right now. Just some of the stuff is stupid, but this one I thought was very interesting, where it's like these memes of people saying, "My son's not gay, he's into women," and then somebody will post a picture and it says "the women," and it's like it's these very stereotypical women that the gay, us gay people are kind of like, "Oh yeah, that should have been a sign," as opposed to somebody else who's not gay, like a woman or a mother or somebody being like, "Well, my son's not gay because he's into women," and for certain people it was a poster of Whitney Houston and Janet Jackson, or what have you. And I posted something like this about a month ago, and I said it all the time. Like, for me, when Vanity 6 and Apollonia 6 and the Mary Jane Girls and all that kind of stuff was out, baby, like, I knew back then, I was maybe 7, 8, 9, 10 years old, but the life that I was getting from those girls out there singing and doing these doo-wops and all this other kind of stuff and I'm like, again, I may not have been able to put it all together, but like Daniel said, there was something in the music just from an emotional standpoint that felt very freeing and felt liberating.
Absolutely.
And in those moments, it was like I wasn't caught up in, okay, well, you shouldn't do this, you're not supposed to do this or whatever, because the music was just very freeing. So I think that, again.
And just to piggyback off this, and it kind of touches on all the topics we touched tonight, but the music was a connecting force for a lot of us, because I'm 46, so I was raised in the 70s, so that was the golden era of music, real music. And so I was raised with jazz, funk, R&B, and like you said, like the Mary Jane Girls was my group. How I got into leather, honestly, was through Maxie.
From Maxie, right, the white girl on that bike.
I loved her. And I was
Body
like,
roll.
and I remember and this is when I say my parents were really cool, because I had posters of them on my wall, and they came to the Cow Palace in San Francisco, and we saw them, and I happened to get front row seats, and I saw her, and I was like, "Hi!" She waved back. I was like, "Oh my gosh!" And but my parents were not tripping. My mom was like, "You have a ball, whatever." But the music has always been, I think, so important. Just, and I hate to kind of compartmentalize us, but in the gay community, because just through all the shit we've been through. Because I remember when HIV/AIDS was like really ravaging our community, house music was just like, it just brought us together. There was the music being so positive and uplifting, and also remembering those we lost, and just that's a whole topic in itself too.
Yes, definitely. It's a lifeline.
We actually talked about that, David, remember, on Revolutionary Health. We actually had a Revolutionary episode about music, and it was so powerful, because having you, and I think it was it Anthony Antoine, and someone
and it may
else.
be Kipper as well.
No,
joined
Kipper
us.
wasn't there. It was another dude who was actually a house music singer. I forgot his name, but it's on CNP's website. I mean, YouTube page. But we've talked about how it got us through even our rough times. You know,
Yeah.
it necessarily had to be about the gay issues, but just rough times. And it was just like, yes, I get it.
And that's the beauty. That's the beauty of it. I mean, I can say that anybody in my family, they know. I mean, like I said, because music is that, like, when I say I'm a soul child, I mean that shit. Like, I was raised on soul music, like Denise Williams and Earth, Wind and Fire and Shaka Khan and Aretha Franklin. That's why Sunday, when I saw Dionne Warwick and Patti LaBelle and, you know, all these people up there and Gladys Knight up there together, it was just kind of like these beautiful women that I saw as kids, you know, as a kid, you know, who were just regal and just grand and, you know what I'm saying, and just dignified. It was something that just made me feel good because they're elders now or what have you. But yes, the music is very free. But we want to go ahead and wrap up for tonight. You know, I think that this was a good way to kick this whole thing off. As I said at the beginning when I did the introduction, we want to thank everybody for tuning in, for watching. There's a couple of things we just want to make sure we mention to you. One, we will be back again in October in about a month or so, where we're really going to be diving into Act 2, which is the wounds. And that's going to get a little heavy. So if anybody ever come to a Brave Soul show or anything else, you'll know we take you on a roller coaster, but we never send you out with, like, you know, a gun to make you feel like you want to just slit your wrist or cut, you know, shoot yourself. I mean, what we want to do is in the artistic performances and definitely in the conversation, like, we're going to take it there. Because as I said to David when we were on the phone talking about this over a month ago, as I always say, you got to rip off the Band-Aid and then you got to treat the wound. And that's really, you know, what we have to do.
Treat the wound with Vaseline. Plain old Vaseline helps. Vaseline works.
Right. I saw you post something about that recently.
Not Neosporin, not Bacitracin, Vaseline.
Dr. Milbranch just told y'all, Vaseline.
And also witch hazel. Witch hazel too.
Baby, just all of these old remedies that, again,
Your grandmama was right. Your grandmama was right.
The Black women, the mamas and the grandmamas always know. But no, in all seriousness, like I said, in October, we'll be diving into some more of the heavy stuff, like, you know, we're going to be talking about the effects of COVID-19 and how this is affecting us. We'll be talking about suicide, about depression, about loneliness, about substance abuse, and all of those kinds of things, and the ways in which all the stuff that we're talking about now, when some of these foundations have been laid, the ways in which that shit, unfortunately, manifests a lot of times. And then in December, we're going to take it up and be a little bit more light and round this out and, you know, dive into some more things. But we definitely want you to come back in October to check out the discussion that we'll have and the performances that we're going to have and the written pieces. In the interim, in addition to watching this, we encourage you to check out the video performance. We have probably about 3 theatrical performances and another multimedia artistic piece, which is right on the same page where you're looking at this. And like I said, at the bottom of the page, you can also see writings from David Milbranch, from Daddy Rod, from Daniel Downer, and from our beautiful, beloved Johnny Ray Cornegay from Counter-Narrative Project. They all wrote beautiful, beautiful pieces. And when you read some of those pieces, something in Johnny's piece is going to resonate in what we talked about with music. That's all I'm going to say. And when y'all read it, we'll talk about it. But when I read his submission, it made my heart, it just made my heart feel good. And I was just like, yes, because he totally speaks about that freedom that we just spoke about. But we definitely want to make sure, again, that we plug Counter-Narrative Project and thank them for their, just for their involvement, for their participation. Counter-Narrative Project is a lifeline to a lot of us as Black queer men. And, you know, just doing the work of just keeping a lot of things out there in terms of affirming the lives of Black gay men, making sure that our stories are told. And again, this week of action, We Will Be Heard National Week of Action is something that, you know, has been going on, and we want to make sure that we acknowledge that. And also, you know, if people want to give feedback, there's ways you can do that right on the website. There's a contact us button, and you can that'll direct right to our email. But if, you know, once you watch something, or if there was something that was said in this panel discussion or anything else that you have questions about or you want to give feedback about, we definitely encourage it as we continue to just let the series evolve. And, you know, like I said, we just want to acknowledge a few key people. Charles Stevens from the Counter-Narrative Project, Johnny Ray Cornegay, our beloved George Lander, who is, you know, the production coordinator for this event, who has just kept me personally on schedule and on cue, and just been right by my side to make sure that this gets executed and, you know, doing all this other stuff the way that we do. And I want to thank Daniel. I want to thank Rodney. I want to thank David Melbranch. And we have probably about another good 10, 12 brothers who are a part of this whole project, between writing, between the performances, and some other people and some new faces that you'll see in Acts 2 and Acts 3 as part of the panel. David and Daddy Rod will be back with us next month in December, and we'll be rounding out some other people. But we definitely want to thank you for tuning in, and we hope that this is something that has entertained and educated.
We want Daniel too. Daniel, come back.
And last but not least, you can also, you know, we encourage you, you know, if you want to be able to donate, or if you want to continue to see this work that we do with Brave Soul Collective continue. Obviously, in the age that we're in with COVID, we have to do all this programming virtually, but tell me I can't, and I'm gonna show you that I can. And you know, that was what COVID was like. Okay, well, we can't perform, and I said, bitch, hold my beer. So, you know, it's hard and it's a lot of work, but we get it done. But those things can't be done without continued support from our audiences. So if you want to donate, you can do that right on the Brave Soul website on the page. And we encourage you to just continue to just tell people about this. That's the most important way that you can further the mission of Brave Soul Collective and Counter Narrative. Check out both websites. Go look at all of the content on the Counter Narrative website and on the Brave Soul website. And just continue to spread the word and tell people about what it is that we're doing, because we are out here doing some important work and shifting narratives and just really being focused and dedicated to telling our stories. So with that, Daniel, David, Rodney, I love y'all. Thank you. I cannot thank you enough. I can say this publicly. I said it to y'all before we started taping. I was terrified tonight when we got on and started recording. I felt a whole lot better. And y'all just made this a whole lot more easy for me, because I've just been really, really nervous and worried about how it was going to pan out. This is the equivalent of what happens before I get my ass on stage. And,
relax.
But this felt good, and I'm looking forward to next month and diving into some of the more serious stuff. So with that, we are going to leave you for tonight, and we will see you in October. And yes, be gentle with yourselves and take care of yourselves and be safe out there in these COVID streets until we can get that bitch to go.
Wear your mask. Wear your mask.
And wear your mask, please. Please wear your mask. And with that, we're going to say good night. So thank you, and we'll see you in October. Bye, y'all.